Oh yes, it's all coming full circle now, isn't it? In 2018, the Edmonton Oilers drafted Evan Bouchard in the top 10 of that draft, and I said at the beginning, I am kind of concerned about a few things in his game. I talked about defensive responsibility, I talked about defensive engagement, back-check engagement, and his lack of foot speed as things to be concerned about. But quickly after Evan Bouchard was drafted, making his way over into the London Knights system once again, eventually for Bakersfield in the AHL, he started to show off that a lot of the things that I was worried about in this guy's game were fixable problems that he actually would go out there and start working towards fixing. Well, guess where we are today? Right now, Evan Bouchard is a player in the National Hockey League. He's 22 years old, 6'3", 194, a big right-handed defenseman with an absolute cannon of a slap shot. After getting drafted and playing in Bakersfield, eventually spending some time in the Södertälje system in the Hockeyallsvenskan last year, where he was under a point per game, Evan Bouchard suited up in 14 games for the Oilers in last year's Canadian division, where he had 5 points. Now, that wasn't necessarily, the most eye-popping number statistic line out there, but it was good enough for Oilers fans to look at it and say, yeah, look at this guy. He's actually going out there and being a serviceable defenseman who's playing on our right side, and we could not have asked for anything more. Our team is already doing really well. We've got McDavid and Draisaitl and all them doing their thing, and Bouchard playing in a limited, sheltered role is going to give him some time to develop. Well, this season, Evan Bouchard is out there with 15 points in 24 games played, and if you take a look at where the Oilers are in the standings, they're doing extraordinarily well right now. Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl torching the league, Jesse Puljujarvi's out there reviving his career, and Zach Hyman is playing better than ever. It's actually kind of crazy because even though you have all these points and all these really good plays coming out of these guys, the power play is pretty interesting because if you take a look at what Daily Faceoff lists as the power play unit, the first power play for the Oilers goes as follows: Hyman, Nugent-Hopkins, Draisaitl, McDavid, Barrie. The second unit, Puljujarvi, Nugent-Hopkins, Draisaitl, McDavid, Nurse. 3 guys stay on the power play the entire time, and I don't know if that's constant, if that actually is how it goes down every single time the Oilers get a power play. Their first and second unit are comprised of half the same personnel, but when it comes to Evan Bouchard, it's actually kind of crazy how he's going out there and doing all the things that he's doing without any significant power play time. If you go over to Evan Bouchard and his game log over here, Bouchard has 2 power play points the entire season. And he's a guy that's noted for his offensive potential on the back end. He's got a really big slap shot, he can unleash it really quickly, and it's so powerful that it sets up good rebounds for his guys. He has been a 5v5 producing beast, and he's only 22 years old. Enter this article by Alan Mitchell on The Athletic. Low tide. Tyson Barrie's contract and skill set make his Oilers' future uncertain. This article, the link will be in the description below. If you want to go ahead and read that, if you have The Athletic, go ahead and do so. But there are some really interesting ideas brought up in this piece regarding the Oilers, regarding their blue line, and regarding Evan Bouchard. So we're going over onto NHLTradeTalk.com because this article is free to read. This is the title. The Oilers will likely try to offload Tyson Barrie's salary this offseason. Why is that? Tyson Barrie, if you go over his entire profile this year, yeah, he's actually playing on that power play. He has 13 points in 24 games played, 2 behind Evan Bouchard, which is funny because Tyson Barrie actually is getting power play time, Bouchard is not. Let's go over onto the NHL Trade Talk piece. As per Alan Mitchell of The Athletic, which is the previous article we highlighted, Tyson Barrie of the Edmonton Oilers may be vulnerable over the next couple of months when it comes to trade talks out of Edmonton. The Oilers defenseman has a secure spot for now, but as Evan Bouchard grows into his role and takes on more minutes on the Oilers' top power play unit, Mitchell believes Barrie will be expendable and his salary will be useful for other needs. In this article, Mitchell goes out there and talks about a few guys that could be potential trade targets, in Puljujarvi, Zach Kassian, Nugent-Hopkins, and Barrie, and pretty much concludes that Barrie would be the guy that would be more likely out of the bunch to be in a trade scenario. Mitchell writes, a less expensive player like Evan Bouchard duplicates Barrie's skill set, and Barrie's cap hit at $4.5 million a season may be needed elsewhere on the roster beginning next year. In other words, the Oilers do not need 2 right-shot defensemen doing the same thing. The next point is one that I really like. Mitchell also adds a third factor into the equation, and that is Barrie's trade value. The Oilers can easily replace Barrie with Bouchard, but there are teams who don't have a player of either defenseman's skill set, nonetheless two who do the same thing. His salary is decent if he's in a top 4 role, and quarterbacking a power play, and the Oilers could get something back of use. Now, it is kind of funny because Tyson Barrie, I gotta remember, this was the guy that produced the most points out of every defenseman last season, and it gets even more ridiculous when you realize that he was like the first defenseman in however many, like 50-something years, might have been less, might have been more, I'm not too sure, who was leading the defenseman class in points, but who didn't get any Norris votes, because Tyson Barrie playing on the power play in the Canadian division with Connor McDavid, etc., was just the ultimate stat booster for him. Now, sure, this season he's not producing as much as he did back then, but still going out there at half a point a game as a right-handed defenseman who is playing at the top of the umbrella with McDavid and Draisaitl on the power play, that is a valuable enough skill set that I do think other NHL teams do lack. A skill set that other teams could look at and say, hey, that's a valuable piece of property right there. We could try to get this player, put him on our power play, try to get an extended scoring touch on our right side too, because $4.5 million a year for the guy who was the top scoring defenseman last season doesn't seem like a bad thing. His contract expires in 23-24, so you've got yourselves some time to take advantage of the 30-year-old right-handed defenseman, but it does get a little bit interesting when you start to consider the replacement and why exactly this would be okay for Edmonton. It was already briefly highlighted in the article, but I really do like the comparison being made between these two, and this isn't even the first discussion that we have had about Evan Bouchard in the first place. We made a video, I think, before the season began, saying that the time is now and that this is a time for him to really ease into the role of being a number 1 caliber defenseman. Whether or not he'll reach that this season, I'm not really too sure, but this is the time to actually start exploring that path and working your way up in the D-Corps. Because, of course, with Barrie, with Nurse, with all these other guys here in Edmonton's defense system, it would be tough for a brand new NHL defenseman to come in here and Evan Bouchard and be like, yeah, give me top 4 minutes. He only played, 20-something NHL games in the past before this year? And so now, doubling that up, being at 24 games played right now, and getting 15 points, Evan Bouchard has gone out there and actually shown off, yeah, he's ready for the big leagues. The mobility issues that I had concerns with back then were not really there anymore. Sure, he's really good at slowing the game down, and I had a problem with that initially too, but it's proving effective for a system that is as run and gun as the Edmonton Oilers is. He's playing a solid enough game to keep him around in the lineup, and the Oilers are benefiting from that. Right now, if you take a look at the Oilers and their game log, Evan Bouchard is averaging about 24 minutes a night in the month of December, which is really good for him. However, if you take a look at Tyson Barrie and you see where his game log performance is, he's averaging just a little bit less. His average ice time this month is 23-23, but it was inflated by 2 25-plus minute games against Seattle and Pittsburgh at the start of the month. Evan Bouchard is technically averaged a little bit more, and he has played consistently more. Bouchard also had a 25-plus minute game when he played 26 minutes against the Kings on Sunday. So this is a really interesting debate because these two guys are particularly offensively capable defensemen with good slap shots. It's just, at what point does the torch get passed? At what point do you say, all right, sorry, Tyson Barrie, but Evan Bouchard is already on your level. He has already surpassed you. Now it's time to get traded, unfortunately. I don't think a lot of Oilers fans would be too upset to see a transition like that, where Tyson Barrie is all of a sudden outplayed by Evan Bouchard, but it is something you have to consider. Furthermore, if you trade away a Tyson Barrie, let's say he continues producing at half a point a game this season, what do you get for this guy? What is the price for a player like Tyson Barrie, who doesn't really do all too much in the defensive zone, and whose reputation of doing anything else outside the offensive zone isn't really all too significant? You play him on the power play, you get him some points, that's good, but how much is that really worth now? Is that a first-round pick? Is that a top prospect? Is that a middle six forward or whatever? The article did say that the $4.5 million AAV salary that Barrie does have could be useful elsewhere on the Oilers. Maybe that's in net, maybe that's some other depth forward that they might be able to acquire, who really knows? So talk to me in the comments, what do you think, if you are an Oilers fan, about, firstly, Evan Bouchard and the big explosion of offense that this guy has been able to go out there and accomplish, how his body of work coagulates with the entire profile he has built for himself, and whether or not this is enough so far to take over Tyson Barrie within the next 12 months. Let me know in the comments what do you think about him overtaking Barrie, whether or not Barrie should get traded if you would do this, and what you would want to get back in a trade if Barrie were to be sent away. Let me know in the comments all your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.